What makes a car abandoned on a rural road so unsettling? It's not just the empty driver's seat. It's the fact that for a brief moment, the vehicle becomes the last physical witness. It tells us someone was there. It tells us something went wrong. It tells us a decision was made, or perhaps forced, between staying with the vehicle and stepping into the dark. In February 2004, 21-year-old Maura Murray crashed her black Saturn on Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. A witness saw a young woman near the vehicle. A police response was underway. Yet, by the time an officer arrived, Maura was gone. 4 years later, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson drove his Chevrolet Lumina into a ditch in rural Minnesota. He called his parents, stayed on the phone with them while trying to find his way out, and then suddenly yelled, "Oh shit." The call ended. Brandon vanished. 2 young adults, 2 rural roads, 2 disabled cars, 2 disappearances that began with the same devastating choice: leaving the vehicle behind. But was it really a choice? Because when I look closely at these cases, I don't see simple stories of people walking away from minor accidents. I see fractured timelines, disorienting landscapes, incomplete evidence, and 2 moments in which the distance between safety and danger may have been far smaller than anyone realized. Maura Murray and Brandon Swanson are often grouped together because their cases appear to share a familiar outline. A young person is traveling alone at night. Their vehicle becomes disabled or stranded. They leave the vehicle. They are never found. But similarity can be misleading. These are not identical cases. Maura disappeared in winter near homes on a curving road in northern New Hampshire. Brandon disappeared in the early hours of a Minnesota spring, surrounded by farm fields, gravel roads, drainage ditches, and a landscape capable of making even a local person profoundly disoriented. What connects them is not a proven cause. What connects them is the central investigative question: what happened in the critical window after each person left their vehicle? Maura Murray was 21 years old and a nursing student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. On February 9th, she left campus and drove north into New Hampshire. Her destination remains uncertain. That uncertainty has fueled years of speculation. But it should not erase what is known. That night, her black Saturn was involved in a single vehicle crash along Route 112 in Haverhill. The New Hampshire Department of Justice and the FBI both continue to identify Maura as a missing person whose disappearance followed that crash. The road itself matters. Route 112, also known locally in that area as Wild Ammonoosuc Road, winds through rural terrain. In February, darkness arrives early. Snowbanks have narrow visibility. Cold becomes a hazard of its own. And in 2004, this was a world before smartphones, live location sharing, and instant access to mapping technology in the palm of your hand. A local school bus driver, Butch Atwood, encountered the crash scene and spoke with the woman believed to be Maura. She declined help. Later, when law enforcement arrived, the Saturn remained, but Maura did not. That is the last confirmed public point in her story. Brandon Swanson's last known hours began differently. He was 19 years old, from Marshall, Minnesota, and had spent the evening in Canby visiting friends after the end of the spring semester. In the early hours of May 14, 2008, Brandon's vehicle became stuck in a ditch. He called his parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, for help. They left home and attempted to locate him while remaining in contact by cell phone. The problem was that Brandon and his parents were not seeing the same map. Brandon believed he was in Lind, Minnesota. He described landmarks and tried to direct his parents toward him, but they could not find him. The phone call continued as Brandon decided to walk, apparently attempting to reach a town or a roadway where he could meet them. Then came the words that have haunted this case for nearly 2 decades. "Oh, shit." The line went silent. Later, investigators learned Brandon had not been near Lind at all. He had been much further away in the Taunton area. His vehicle was eventually located on Lincoln Lyon Road near Taunton, stuck in a ditch with no sign of Brandon. His case remains listed as an unresolved missing person investigation by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension and NamUs. This is where both cases become more than mysterious disappearances. They become investigations into human perception under pressure. When your car is disabled, when you're cold or tired or embarrassed or impaired, when you believe help is nearby, the decision to leave may feel logical. But in darkness, on an unfamiliar road, the map in your head can become dangerously wrong. Let's start with Maura Murray, because the case has become so widely discussed that it's easy to confuse theory with evidence. The basic fact pattern is stark. Maura's Saturn was reported off the road on Route 112 at approximately 7:30 p.m. on February 9, 2004. The FBI's missing person notice places her disappearance in Haverhill that night at age 21. Witness accounts indicate that a woman was seen near the vehicle after the crash. The responding officer found the car, but Maura was no longer at the scene. That gap between the crash and the police arrival is the case. It's not a large gap in the abstract, but on a rural road at night, it is an enormous gap in investigative terms. A person can walk out of sight in minutes. A passing driver can stop and leave. A confused person can enter the woods. An injury can worsen. A witness can misunderstand what they see. A car can travel by without anyone remembering it decades later. The Saturn became a kind of frozen movement. It was physical evidence of Maura's presence, but it did not answer the essential question. Did she leave voluntarily? Did she accept a ride? Did she enter the woods, or did another person take control of what happened next? The popular claim that there were no footprints in the snow should be handled carefully. It captures the eerie atmosphere surrounding the case, but it is not a substitute for a formal evidentiary conclusion. Snow conditions, roadside conditions, traffic, emergency response activity, later searches, and the passage of time all affect what can and cannot be read from the ground. The important fact is not a dramatic claim about pristine snow. The important fact is that Maura was not located in the immediate aftermath of the crash, and the extensive searches did not resolve where she went. That's the difference between a clue and a conclusion. One theory holds that Maura may have left the area on foot and succumbed to the elements, or became lost in the wooded terrain. This theory has a grim logic. February in New Hampshire can become life-threatening quickly, especially for someone without adequate clothing, supplies, or a clear sense of direction. But the theory has limits. If Maura left the road and died in the surrounding wilderness, why has no confirmed physical trace been recovered? That question does not disprove this theory. Terrain can conceal evidence for years. Search areas can be imperfect, but the absence of a recovery keeps the question open. Another theory is that Maura accepted a ride from someone after the crash. It is plausible because she had a reason to get away from the disabled vehicle quickly. She may have feared police involvement. She may have wanted to avoid family contact. She may have simply believed someone was helping her reach a phone or a safe place. But accepting a ride does not automatically mean abduction. A person could have accepted a ride and later been dropped off somewhere else. They could have encountered danger later, or they could have entered a vehicle with someone who meant them harm. Each possibility requires a separate chain of events, none of which have been publicly proven. Then there are the questions surrounding Maura's actions before she left Massachusetts. Like why she packed her belongings, why she traveled north, what she intended to do, and whether she was under stress. Those questions matter because they establish context. But context is not causation. A person can be distressed without intending to disappear. A person can pack belongings for a short trip. A person can make decisions that seem strange in hindsight and still never anticipate danger. Investigators must resist the temptation to treat unusual behavior as explanation for disappearance. It's evidence of uncertainty, not proof of voluntary vanishing. Now look at Brandon Swanson. Brandon's case is especially devastating because we know he was alive after his car entered the ditch. We know he had contact with his parents. We know he was trying to get help. And we know that his own belief about his location appears to have been wrong. The official NamUs case summary says Brandon was last seen in Canby. His car became stuck in a ditch while he was headed home. He called his parents, and the call ended abruptly. It further states that his car was located later on that day on Lincoln Lyon Road near Taunton with no sign of him. The vehicle location transformed the case. Brandon thought he was near Lind. His parents searched around Lind, but cell phone records later indicated that he was in the Taunton area, about 25 miles away from where he believed himself to be. I want you to think about that for a moment. Brandon was not just lost in a physical sense. He was navigating with a false starting point. His parents were trying to find him from an entirely different location. Every direction he gave them may have sounded coherent to him while leading them further from the truth. The darkness of rural Minnesota can be deceptive. Gravel roads look alike. Fields merge into blackness. Drainage ditches, creeks, culverts, railroad tracks, fence lines, and tree rows can be difficult to identify even in the daylight. At night, with limited visibility and limited phone reception, a person can mistake a road, a town light, or a distant landmark. Brandon reportedly told his parents he was walking toward Lind. Yet, if he was actually near Taunton, he may have been walking in a direction he believed would take him to safety while moving deeper into unfamiliar terrain. That abrupt exclamation, "Oh shit," has driven nearly every theory in Brandon's case. Some hear it as evidence that he encountered another person. Others hear a fall, a sudden slip into the water, a confrontation, a vehicle approaching, an animal, a fence, a ditch, an unexplained obstacle. The honest answer is that the phrase tells us only one thing with confidence. Something startled Brandon. It does not tell us what. One possibility is accidental death. Brandon may have fallen into Yellow Medicine River or another hazardous area while walking in darkness. A fall, immersion, head injury, or exposure could explain both the sudden end of the call and the lack of further contact. But again, the absence of confirmed remains or belongings makes that answer incomplete. Searchers have worked the area, time has passed, and still no discovery has definitively explained what happened after that call. Another possibility is foul play. Brandon was vulnerable, alone, and confused. Those conditions can create opportunity. But opportunity is not evidence. There is no publicly established suspect, no public forensic finding that proves an abduction, and no confirmed witness account placing Brandon with another person after he left the car. That absence is frustrating, but it matters. Investigative integrity means refusing to turn suspicion into fact simply because the alternative is painful. There is another important legacy in Brandon's case. His disappearance exposed an institutional weakness in how missing adult reports could be treated. His family helped push for what became known as Brandon's Law in Minnesota, requiring authorities to take reports and investigate missing persons without delay rather than dismissing concerns based on an adult's age, the short time since the last contact, or assumptions that the person left voluntarily. That change doesn't answer what happened to Brandon, but it acknowledges a hard truth. Adulthood does not erase vulnerability, and that brings us back to the abandoned vehicles. Maura's Saturn and Brandon's Lumina should not be viewed simply as places where their journeys ended. They were decision points. They were the last locations where each person had shelter, visibility, some form of protection from the elements, and a fixed point rescuers could locate. But there are many reasons people leave a car. Fear of police, fear of being stranded, panic, injury, alcohol impairment, coincidence that help is close, a desire to find a phone signal, a belief that walking is faster than waiting. In both cases, the vehicle may have felt like a trap. That's the terrible paradox. The car was the obvious place to search. But to Maura and Brandon, at least in that moment, it may have seemed like the place they needed to escape. The disappearances of Maura Murray and Brandon Swanson endure because neither case gives us a clean ending. There is no confirmed final destination, no definitive crime scene beyond roadside locations, no publicly proven explanation that accounts for every fact. And in both cases, the cars remain more tangible than answers. Maura Murray's Saturn on Route 112 tells us she reached Haverhill on February 9, 2004. It tells us that a crash occurred. It tells us there was a narrow but consequential period in which she disappeared from view. The FBI and New Hampshire authorities continue to treat her disappearance as unsolved. Brandon Swanson's Lumina in the ditch near Taunton tells us his call for help was real. It tells us he was not where he believed he was. It tells us he walked away into a landscape that had already confused every effort to find him. Minnesota's BCA still lists Brandon as a missing person, with Taunton identified as a related location in the case. The temptation in cases like these is to demand a single explanation. Abduction, exposure, accident, voluntary disappearance, foul play. But the responsible conclusion is often more difficult. We just don't know. What we can say is that both cases expose the danger of the final mile, the point at which a routine problem becomes a crisis. A disabled car becomes an abandoned car. A phone call becomes a last contact. A person who should be traceable becomes someone whose fate cannot be established. I think that's why these cases stay with people. They did not begin in some distant, unknowable world. They begin with a recognizable decision, a late night drive, a vehicle in a ditch, a crash on a dark road, a person telling themselves they can walk to help. For Maura and Brandon, that decision marked the last point at which the evidence can clearly follow them. And that is the unanswered question at the heart of both investigations. Did they walk away from their vehicles willingly, believing safety was close? Or did the darkness behind those vehicles contain something neither of them could see? Until those questions are answered, the Saturn on Route 112 and the Lumina near Taunton remain what they have always been. Not solutions, but silent witnesses to two people who vanished after abandoning the wheel. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Vanished. I'm Kyle Fields. I'll see you next time.